Hi, my name is Kayla Flume, and I'm a part of Group 7, and the author that we chose is Toni Morrison. My page focuses on magical realism, how Toni Morrison embodies it as a writer, how her novels embody it, and how she feels about the term in general. I open my page asking the question, what does this all mean, and why do audiences label Toni Morrison as a magical realism novelist? By what does this all mean, I'm referring to the other pages within this site, learning about her childhood, where she grew up, her family, her culture, things of that nature. They do really make her the person that she is, the writer that she is, and the reason why she produces the novels that she does. I wanted to first define magical realism, which I do right here. And I define it as a genre that portrays realistic views of the real world, but with a twist of magical elements. Magical realism manages to take real life situations such as death, love, social status, racism, sexism, just to name a few, but they tell these stories and these issues in a unique way with magical elements such as a ghost, spirits, or supernatural powers such as being able to fly or communicate with dead people. And it's because of these reasons that Beloved is labeled as a magical realism genre. Here I discuss Beloved and magical realism. And because Beloved is a novel that is set in the real world and is filled with real characters, but who are communicating with and plagued by a ghost, it's this mixing of the real world reality and the supernatural world of Beloved the Ghost that makes this novel a magical realism novel. Toni Morrison tackles a lot of issues in this novel, and she kind of uses the ghost to be the vessel to tackle issues such as slavery, racism, familial issues, regret, the past interfering with and affecting the present and the future. And because she uses the ghost as a vessel to tackle these situations, it is easy to find itself in the magical realism genre. So Morrison, she was in fact surprised by, which is a quote that I had found from an interview, surprised to be compared to the magical realism novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I was surprised to read because not only does Beloved certainly embody magical realism elements, but her other novels, such as Song of Solomon, Sula, and The Bluest Eye, they all also incorporate magical realism elements. But in this same excerpt here, where she says she was surprised to be compared to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, she goes on to say that this label doesn't really mean anything to her. Quote, schools are only important to me when I'm teaching literature. It doesn't mean anything to me when I'm sitting here with a big pile of blank yellow paper. What do I say? I'm a magical realist. Each subject matter demands its own form, end quote. I interpret this to mean that she really doesn't care about labels, and it's not something she focuses on when she sits down to write. It's, as another page mentions on this Google site, it's what she knows. She grew up in a culture that ghosts are openly talked about, she is a spiritual person, and so this is her reality, so it doesn't seem unique to her, but it in fact is. In another interview that I found, it's a discussion between Paul D and C. Then she goes on to say that it was her goal with this novel to not describe what things looked like, because she felt that it would distract the readers from their own personal experience, but she instead wanted to try and describe what things felt like. And I felt that that was a really unique way of approaching it. And I link John Thiem's concept of textualization to that a little bit later in my concluding paragraph here. As I kind of briefly mentioned before, Toni Morrison's childhood, family, culture, and ethnicity are what inspires her writing and the novels that she has produced thus far. And as I mentioned, another page on this site discusses how these supernatural elements are her reality and they are her from her own personal world. But as someone like me who has not had that upbringing, it it is, reading a whole other world and a whole other take on life. And as I've felt with other novels throughout this semester, magical realism has a really special way of taking relatable issues, or even if they're not on the surface relatable, if you dig a little bit deeper, you can always find a relatability with something or a connection with something. But they all use a unique way of communicating these issues, whether it is through a ghost or through, the power of flight, as in Song of Solomon, or with a plague of robins, as in her novel Sula. They all communicate something that is relatable. I think that if you were to ask Morrison what magical realism means to her, I think she would definitely say that it takes supernatural elements to highlight a specific story. I think that she would possibly be a bit more specific with that and say that, the genre enables you to, in her case, take the story of African American men and women, and tell it in a relatable way by using these elements such as ghosts and spirits, which, again, it may have been normal to her, but it's not normal to a majority of people, I think. And so, therefore, everyone is kind of on the same playing field when it comes to reading the story. You don't have to be an African American man or woman to get the story, because no one really understands a ghost or a spirit. But that vessel, that tool, puts us all on the same playing field. I wanted to conclude my site by touching on that concept I mentioned earlier, John Thiem's magical realism concept of textualization, because I thought that the last quote that she mentions here in her interview is another reason why her novels are magical realism novels. The fact that she really, really focused so much on Beloved, at least, to not tell the readers how they should feel or how they should react to something, but she wanted them to conjure up their own feelings and experiences, that is such a magical realism concept. And she does it so successfully. And I think that's another reason why she is labeled as a magical realism novelist, and why many of her novels do fall into this genre. At the end of the day, I don't really think she cares about labels, and I think that's great. She's a woman who's dealt with labels her whole life, and I don't think that they should be labeled, and I don't think that's her goal, is to produce these novels. But, her unique upbringing and her very in touch spiritual demeanor, these are the novels that she produces, and I think they're magical and fantastic. And that is Morrison and magical realism.